They say you can't take it with you. But on a Tuesday in September of 1857, amidst the screaming winds of a hurricane, one man decided to try. While 425 souls were swept into the Black Atlantic, this man didn't reach for a lifeline. He reached for his gold. They called her the Ship of Gold. She was a floating bank vault, her steam-powered beast carrying the heart of the American economy. But the ocean does not respect net worth. It only respects physics. And when the waves rose and the engines died, 20 tons of precious metal stopped being a fortune and became an anchor. For over a century she sat in the crushing darkness, 8,000 feet down, a ghost ship guarding a cursed treasure that men would eventually build robots to retrieve. But the true story isn't about the salvage. It's about the silence before the sink. Tonight, we are going to peel back the layers of the Atlantic. We are going to walk the tilted decks of the doomed, and we are going to witness the moment where ambition met the abyss. So, turn down the lights, settle into your chair, and let's descend into the deep. Welcome to the story of the SS Central America. There is a specific kind of darkness that only exists in the middle of the ocean. It is not merely the absence of light, it is the presence of something else, a heaviness, a suffocating, crushing weight that presses against the eyes and the lungs. In this darkness, there is no horizon. There is no distinction between the black sky and the black water, save for the sound. The sound is the only truth. It is a roar, a continuous, deafening argument between the wind and the waves, a chaotic symphony that screams of violence and indifference. If you were there, floating in that void, the first thing you would notice is the cold. It bites through wool and skin, reaching directly for the marrow. But the second thing you would notice, if you were one of the unlucky ones, is the weight. Survival, in the most primal sense, is a game of buoyancy. It is the simple physics of keeping your head above the waterline. To live, you must be light. You must shed your boots, your coat, your history, your possessions. You must become driftwood. But on a Tuesday in September of 1857, amidst the churning fury of the Atlantic, there were men who refused to be light. There were men thrashing in the foam, their lungs burning for air, who chose to drown rather than let go of what they carried. They did not cling to wreckage. They did not cling to each other. They clung to leather belts heavy with metal. They clutched satchels that dragged them down like anchors. One man drifting in that violent expanse is different. He is holding on, but he is not just holding on to life. He is holding on to a fortune. This story begins with that image, a man named Ottinger, suspended in the abyss fighting the entire Atlantic Ocean for the right to keep what is his. But to understand why a man would bargain his breath for a bar of metal, we cannot start in the water. We cannot start with the scream of the wind or the snapping of masts. We must go back to the dry land. We must go back to the silence of a bank vault and the fever of a nation that had forgotten the difference between value and worth. We must understand the concept of weight. In 1857, America was a teenage empire, awkward, aggressive, and growing faster than its own bones could support. The country was drunk. It was intoxicated by a yellow metal that had been pulled from the riverbeds of California nearly a decade prior. The gold rush was no longer a frantic dash of prospectors with pans. It had become an industry. It was a machine. The gold did not stay in California. It flowed. It was a golden artery that pumped from the Sierra Nevada mountains down to the coast, onto ships, across the Isthmus of Panama, and then, crucially, up the Atlantic to New York City. This was the bloodstream of the American economy. The banks on the East Coast didn't just want this gold, they breathed it. They needed it to back their paper currency, to fuel the expansion of railroads that were snaking across the Midwest, to prop up a credit system that was stretched to its breaking point. Imagine the atmosphere of New York in that sweltering summer. The streets are crowded with horse-drawn carriages, the air thick with the smell of coal smoke and unwashed bodies, the noise a constant clatter of commerce. Men in frock coats stand in the marble lobbies of Wall Street, checking pocket watches, waiting for news. They are nervous. The economy is trembling. There have been whispers of failure. The Ohio Life Insurance and Trust Company has collapsed. Confidence is evaporating like water on a hot pavement. Everyone is waiting for the ships. Specifically, They are waiting for the steamers from Panama. These ships are not just carrying passengers, they are floating bank vaults. They are the only thing keeping the panic at bay. If the gold arrives, the loans are paid, the ledgers balance, and the party continues. If the gold does not arrive, well, no one wants to think about that. The nation had built a house of cards, and it had built it on the deck of a ship. It is a strange thing to trust a nation's solvency to the temperament of the ocean. But arrogance is the luxury of a booming generation. They believed they had conquered the Atlantic. They had built ships of iron and oak, powered by massive steam engines that churned the water with paddle wheels the size of houses. They believed that geometry and coal could outrun the weather. They believed that gold was a talisman that offered protection. Into this world steps a man named Ottinger. History is often kind to the victims of tragedy, painting them all with the same brush of noble suffering, but a documentary camera, if it could travel back in time, would linger on Ottinger with a different kind of focus. He is not a man of the frontier with dirt under his fingernails and a dream of a better life. He is a man of the ledger. He is a man of the East. Picture him standing on a dock in Panama, watching the transfer of cargo. The heat is oppressive, a wet blanket that makes the air shimmer. He is dressed impeccably despite the climate. A stiff collar, a dark coat, eyes that scan the horizon not for beauty, but for risk. Ottinger represents a specific type of ambition. He does not want to find the gold, he wants to move it. He understands that the miner who finds the nugget is gambling, but the man who transports the nugget is investing. But this time the investment is personal. There is $20 million in gold sitting on the manifest. In today's terms, the value is astronomical. In the hundreds of millions, perhaps billions, depending on how you calculate the rarity and the historical weight. But to Ottinger, it isn't just a number, it is leverage. He has placed a bet that assumes the world is predictable, a bet that assumes a steam engine is stronger than a hurricane. He insists on oversight. He is the kind of man who trusts no one with the keys. He watches the porters heaving the heavy wooden crates. He listens to the thud as they are placed onto the deck. Thud, thud, thud. Each sound is a reassurance. Each crate is a promise of power. He is not alone, of course. There are nearly 600 souls preparing to board the vessel that will take them north. They are a cross-section of the American dream. There are successful miners returning home to show off their success. There are failures returning home to hide their shame. There are women, children, newlyweds. There is Ansel Easton and his young bride, Addie, traveling in the first-class staterooms, surrounded by velvet and mahogany. There are rough men in steerage, sleeping in bunk beds stacked 3 high, guarding their small pouches of gold dust with knives and sleepless eyes. But Ottinger stands apart. He carries a different kind of burden. He knows the fragility of the banks back home. He knows that if this shipment is delayed or lost, it isn't just a tragedy, it is a catastrophe. He is the embodiment of the anxiety that is gripping the financial markets. He is the personification of too big to fail. The ship that awaits them is the SS Central America. She is a beast of her time, 278 feet long, a side-wheel steamer. She is painted black with 3 masts that stand like skeletal fingers pointing at the sky. She is a hybrid creature, half sailing ship, half machine. She has sails to catch the wind, but her heart is a massive steam engine that requires an army of men to feed. She is known as the Ship of Gold. Walk with me up the gangplank. Feel the vibration of the deck. The ship is alive. Even at the dock, she hums with the latent energy of the boilers. There is a smell here, a mixture of salt water, tar, polished wood, and the acrid bite of coal smoke. It is the smell of the Industrial Revolution at sea. The loading process is a spectacle. The gold does not come in a single lump. It comes in bars, stamped with the insignias of assayers. It comes in coins, freshly minted $20 double eagles shining with that peculiar heavy luster that only gold possesses. It comes in raw dust, stored in pokes and leather bags. The weight is logged. The crew struggles with the crates. They are placed deep in the ship, in the specie room, but also in staterooms under bunks, wherever there is space. The ship literally sits lower in the water because of this cargo. She is heavy. She is pregnant with wealth. The engineers, men with faces smeared in grease and eyes used to reading gauges, notice the draft. They know that a heavy ship is a sluggish ship. They know that buoyancy is a calculation, and they have subtracted a significant margin of error by loading tons of metal into the hull. But they say nothing. The schedule is the law. The mail must arrive, the gold must arrive. Ottinger watches the waterline. He sees the heavy black paint sink below the surface. He nods. To him, the weight is not a danger, it is a comfort. Lightness is poverty, weight is security. The Central America casts off. The paddle wheels begin to turn, churning the harbor water into a frothy white milk. The whistle blows, a deep, mournful sound that echoes off the hills. They are leaving the tropics. They are heading for New York. For the first few days, the ocean is a liar. The Caribbean and the lower Atlantic offer a performance of tranquility. The sea is a sheet of blue glass, rippled only by the gentle wake of the ship. The sky is a vast, empty dome of azure. The passengers relax. They settle into the rhythm of the voyage. Life on board is a microcosm of society. In first class, the stewards serve champagne in crystal flutes. There are long dinners with multiple courses, oysters, roast beef, fine wines. Men smoke cigars on the deck, leaning against the railing, watching the flying fish skip across the water. They talk of politics. They talk of the looming crisis in Kansas. They talk of the railroads. They pat their pockets, reassured by the heavy clink of coins. Ottinger moves among them, but he does not truly join them. He is often seen near the secure areas. He checks the locks. He speaks to the purser. He is a man who cannot relax because he knows exactly what is at stake. He counts the days. He calculates the speed. He does the math in his head. Knots per hour, tons of coal consumed, miles to go. Down below, in the belly of the beast, the reality is different. The firemen, stripped to the waist, shovel coal into the furnaces. It is a hellscape of heat and noise. The furnaces roar like dragons, demanding to be fed. The coal dust coats the men's lungs, their skin, their eyelashes. They work in shifts, blinded by sweat, keeping the pressure up. They are the muscles of the swimmer, working unseen while the face above water smiles. The ship makes a stop in Havana. More coal, more passengers, more weight. When they leave Cuba, the mood is high. They are on the final leg. New York is just a few days away. The captain, William Lewis Herndon, is a respected naval officer. He is a man of science, an explorer of the Amazon, a man who knows the sea. He walks the deck with an air of calm authority. He inspires confidence. But confidence is a fragile thing when the barometer begins to fall. It happens subtly at first. The blue sky begins to pale, turning a milky white. The horizon becomes hazy, blurring the line between sea and sky. The air grows heavy, sticky with humidity. The wind, which had been a consistent friend, becomes erratic. It gusts, then dies, then gusts again from a different direction. On the bridge, Captain Herndon looks at the glass. The mercury is dropping. Not plummeting, not yet, but sliding downward with a steady persistence. He knows what time of year it is. September, the season of hurricanes. But in 1857, there is no wireless radio. There are no satellites looking down from space to track the swirling clouds. A ship is an island of information. They can only see what is within the radius of their own eyesight. They do not know that a monster has been born in the warm waters to the south. They do not know that a cyclone is churning its way north, moving to intersect their path with the precision of a predator stalking its prey. The decision is made to press on. What else can they do? To turn back is to fail. To wait is to lose money. The engines are strong. The ship is large. They have weathered storms before. Ottinger, standing on the promenade deck, feels the first true swell. It is not a wave. It is a lifting of the entire ocean. The ship rises, slowly, deliberately, and then descends. It is the breathing of a giant. He grips the railing. The metal is cold under his hand. He looks at the water. It has changed color. It is no longer blue. It is a bruised gray flecked with white caps that look like teeth. The wind begins to sing. At first it is a low whistle in the rigging. Then it becomes a moan. The flags snap violently. The smoke from the stack is no longer rising. It is being torn away horizontally, flattened against the water. The passengers retreat from the decks. The dinner service becomes difficult. Glasses slide across tables. Laughter becomes nervous. The conversation shifts from the stock market to the weather. "Just a squall," someone says. "It will pass by morning." "The captain knows what he is doing," another assures. Ottinger does not speak. He goes to his cabin. He checks the security of his own luggage. He feels the vibration of the propeller shaft through the floorboards. It feels different now. It feels strained. Night falls, and with the darkness comes the true violence. The transition is not gradual. It is as if a door has been slammed shut. The wind rises to a gale. The sea begins to heap up in chaotic, confused pyramids of water. The Central America is now steaming directly into the teeth of the storm. Captain Herndon stands on the bridge, his coat flapping wildly, rain stinging his face like buckshot. He faces a choice. He can slow down, turn the ship to run with the wind, ease the strain on the hull. But that means going off course. That means delay. That means the gold arrives late. The logic of the machine takes over. The schedule dictates the strategy. He orders the engines to maintain speed. He believes he can punch through the storm wall. He believes that the sheer force of the steam engine can bully the Atlantic into submission. Down in the engine room, the order comes through the speaking tube. Maintain pressure. The firemen shovel faster. The ship groans. She climbs a massive wave, hangs for a sickening moment in the air, her paddle wheels spinning in the void, and then crashes down into the trough with a sound like a cannon shot. The timber shudders. The iron bolts scream. Water sprays over the bow, sweeping the length of the deck. It is not just spray anymore, it is green water. Solid, heavy ocean crashing onto the ship. Ottinger lies in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. He can hear the cargo shifting. Somewhere deep below, the gold is moving. The crates are heavy, but the ocean is stronger. He imagines the bars sliding, clinking, fighting against their restraints. He thinks of the banks in New York. He thinks of the panic. He thinks of his own fortune. He realizes, perhaps for the first time, that his leverage is trapped in a wooden box surrounded by 1,000,000 tons of angry water. The wind turns. It shifts direction, twisting the sea into a corkscrew. The ship rolls heavily. She lists to one side, struggling to right herself. She is heavy, too heavy. The gold, which was her reason for being, is now her enemy. It is a dead weight in her belly, pulling her down, refusing to let her dance with the waves. The storm is no longer a weather event. It is a siege, and as the first grey light of dawn struggles to penetrate the storm clouds, the men in the engine room notice something terrifying. The water in the bilge is rising. The pumps are chugging, rhythmic and steady, but the level is not going down. The ocean has found a way in. A seal has failed. A seam has opened. A port has shattered. It doesn't matter how. The Atlantic is entering the Central America. The confidence of the previous night has been washed away. The illusion of the floating bank is dissolving. Now it is just wood and iron against water and wind. Ottinger stands up. The floor is tilted. He has to grab the doorframe to stay upright. He hears shouting from the corridor. Not panic yet, but urgency. "All hands!" a voice bellows. "All hands to the pumps." The grand ambition is over. The reality has arrived. The gold is no longer an asset. It is ballast. And the storm is just beginning to breathe. The ocean is asking a question. How much is your life worth? And for the men on the SS Central America, the answer is about to be weighed in gold. To understand the death of a steamship, you must first understand its heart. In 1857, the heart was a violent, hungry thing. It was a cavern of cast iron and fire, located deep within the hull, far below the waterline. It was a place where day and night did not exist, where the only sun was the blinding glare of the open furnace doors, and the only air was thick with coal dust and the smell of roasting grease. Down here, the storm was not wind and rain, it was motion. Imagine standing on a floor that is constantly tilting 20 degrees to the left, then 20 degrees to the right, in a sickening, rhythmic pendulum swing. Now imagine that floor is slick with oil and seawater. Now imagine you are holding a shovel, and your task is to feed a fire that consumes tons of fuel every hour, while the world around you screams. This was the reality for the firemen of the SS Central America. They were the unseen engines of the empire. While the passengers above prayed in their cabins, these men stood thigh-deep in a rising mixture of black water and sludge. The problem was not just the leak. Ships leak, wooden hulls flex in a storm, seams open and close like pores. The pumps were designed for this. They were massive mechanical lungs, sucking water from the bilge and spitting it back into the ocean. But the pumps on the Central America had a fatal flaw, one that would only be revealed in the chaos of the crisis: the coal. As the ship rolled violently in the hurricane, the coal bunkers, massive storage bins filled with fuel, began to disintegrate. The coal didn't just slide. It ground itself into dust. It mixed with the incoming seawater to create a thick, gritty slurry, a black paste. This paste flowed into the bilges. It was sucked into the pumps, and slowly, systematically, it choked them. The engineers watched the gauges with growing horror. They could hear the strain in the machinery. The rhythmic thump hiss of the pumps began to stutter. Valves clogged. Pipes seized. The mechanical lungs were filling with emphysema. They fought back with desperation. Men dove into the freezing, oily water, holding their breath, trying to clear the intakes with their bare hands. They surfaced, gasping, their faces masked in black slime, shouting that it was no use. The water was coming in faster than the machines could push it out, and as the water rose, it began to threaten the fires. This is the nightmare scenario for a steamship. If the water reaches the furnaces, the fires die. If the fires die, the steam pressure drops. If the pressure drops, the paddle wheels stop turning. And if the wheels stop, the ship loses its ability to steer. It becomes a deadlog, turning broadside to the waves, waiting to be broken. Above them, in the cargo hold, another drama was playing out. A silent one. The gold was down there. The $20 million, the tons of bullion, the heavy wooden crates, the sacks of dust. In a calm sea, weight is just a number on a manifest. In a hurricane, weight is a physical antagonist. The Central America was carrying a fortune, but that fortune was dense. It sat low in the ship. As the water filled the hold, the ship began to lose its buoyancy. But worse, it began to list. The water, sloshing freely inside the hull, followed gravity. When the ship rolled to starboard, thousands of gallons of water rushed to that side, and because of the immense weight of the gold and the water combined, the ship struggled to roll back. She hung there, she leaned. The engineers called up to the bridge. The report was grim. The water was gaining, the pumps were dying, the list was increasing. The gold, once the reason for the voyage, was now anchoring them to the bottom of the trough. Captain Herndon received the news on the quarterdeck. The wind was so loud he had to scream to be heard by the man standing next to him. The rain was driving horizontally, feeling like gravel against the skin. Herndon was a man of the Navy. He understood the chain of command and he understood panic. He knew that if the passengers realized the engines were failing, chaos would kill them before the ocean did. He needed to buy time. He needed to lighten the ship. But he did not order the gold to be thrown overboard. Instead, he ordered a bucket brigade. It is a scene that belongs in a painting of the Inferno. The call went out through the luxury staterooms, through the dining saloons, through the steerage bunks. All hands to save the ship. And they came. The social hierarchy of the 19th century, so rigid and impenetrable on land, dissolved in the face of the Atlantic. Bankers stood next to miners. Aristocrats stood next to deckhands. Women in silk dresses, their skirts heavy with water, stood next to rough men who had spent years digging in the mud of California. They formed lines, long snaking lines that stretched from the flooded lower decks up the stairwells to the gangways. They used whatever they could find: leather fire buckets, cooking pots from the galley, waste bins, even hats. For hours the rhythm of the ship was replaced by the rhythm of human labor. Dip, lift, pass, dip, lift, pass. It was a mesmerizing, exhausting machine made of flesh and bone. Men worked until their hands blistered, and then worked until the blisters popped and bled. When a man collapsed from exhaustion, another stepped over him to take his place. They sang hymns to keep the rhythm. Old Hundredth. Rock of Ages. The voices were thin and frail against the roaring wind, but they held. Among them, watching, was Ottinger. He did not join the line, or if he did not stay long. His mind was occupied with a different calculation. He moved through the ship, checking the secure areas. He was obsessed with the integrity of the cargo. There is a madness that overtakes a man when he believes his value is tied to an object. To Ottinger, the water rising in the hold was not just a threat to his life, it was a solvent dissolving his future. He saw the bucket brigade not as a fight for survival, but as a fight for the asset. Survivors would later recall seeing men like him, men who seemed detached from the immediate physical reality, men who were guarding their staterooms while the walls were caving in. Someone suggested, amidst the shouting and the wind, that they should dump the cargo. "Throw the gold over," a voice cried out. "Lighten the ship." It was the most logical, rational thought possible. If you are drowning, you drop the stone, but the order never came. To throw the gold overboard would be to admit that the voyage had failed. It would be to destroy the very thing that justified the risk. It would be financial suicide. And for the men in charge, financial suicide was indistinguishable from physical death. So the gold stayed. It sat in the dark, wet hold, heavy and immobile, while men destroyed their bodies trying to lift a few gallons of water at a time with buckets. The irony was absolute. They were bailing the ocean out of the ship with teaspoons, while 20 tons of metal held them down. And then the wind stopped. It didn't taper off, it didn't fade, it simply vanished. The roar that had been the background noise of their existence for 2 days was replaced by a silence so profound it felt loud. The rain ceased. The clouds above broke, revealing a terrifyingly clear patch of blue sky. They had entered the eye. The Central America lay wallowing in the swells. Without the wind to push her over, she righted herself slightly, but she rode deep, sluggish and heavy. The passengers stumbled out onto the decks. They were dazed. They looked at the sun as if they had never seen it before. Some fell to their knees and wept, believing it was a miracle. They thought the storm had broken. They thought God had intervened. A bird, a small land bird, exhausted and blown far out to sea, landed on the railing. It sat there, preening its feathers, completely unafraid of the humans who stared at it. It was a surreal image of peace in the middle of a battlefield, but Captain Herndon knew. He looked at the barometer. It was still bottomed out. He looked at the wall of black clouds that encircled them, a coliseum of destruction waiting to close in. This was not salvation. This was the intermission. He used the calm to assess the damage. It was catastrophic. The sails were shredded. The rigging was a tangled mess. The hull was leaking in multiple places, and the water in the engine room was still rising. He gathered the passengers. He stood on a crate, his uniform sodden, his face grey with fatigue. He did not lie to them, but he did not tell them the whole truth. He told them to keep bailing. He told them that if they could keep the water down until the engines could be restarted, they had a chance. It was a lie of omission. The engines were not going to restart. The fires were drowned. The coal was a slurry. The heart of the ship was dead. Ottinger used the calm to go back to the specie room. The water was deep there now. The crates were submerged. He couldn't see them, but he knew they were there. He could feel their presence. He stood in the water, a solitary figure in the bowels of the dying ship, communion with his idol. He must have known then. He must have realized that the ship was not going to make New York. The bank vault had become a tomb, but still he made no move to free it. He did not break open the crates and distribute the gold to the passengers, hoping they might save a few coins. He did not try to jettison it, he kept it sealed. Possession was still 9/10 of the law, even when the law was being written by the hurricane. And then, the wall hit them. The other side of the eye is often worse than the first. The wind returns instantly, and it comes from the opposite direction. The Central America was slammed by a wall of wind moving at over 100 miles per hour. The ship, which had been listing to starboard, was suddenly whipped violently to port. The shock was incredible. Men were thrown across the deck. The bucket lines were scattered like bowling pins. The ocean reclaimed the ship. The waves, now confused and colliding from two different wind directions, became mountains. They crashed over the bow, sweeping away everything that wasn't bolted down. And then the sound that everyone feared, a hiss, a long, dying exhale. The water had reached the last of the fires. The boilers, cooling rapidly, ceased to produce steam. The great pistons, which had been the rhythmic heartbeat of the vessel, slowed. Thump, 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 and stopped. The silence of the engines was worse than the noise of the storm. A steamship without an engine is a terrifying thing. It feels dead under your feet. It loses its agency. It is no longer fighting the sea. It is submitting to it. The paddle wheels stopped turning. They acted as giant brakes dragging in the water. The ship swung broadside to the waves. This is the trough of the sea. It is the most dangerous position a ship can be in. The waves strike the full length of the hull, rolling it over, hammering the planks. Captain Herndon knew this was the end of the vessel. The equation had been solved, and the result was 0. He ordered the flag to be hoisted upside down, the universal signal of distress. But in the grey, swirling mist of the hurricane, who would see it? Who was there to watch this tragedy unfold? Only the ocean. Herndon went to his cabin. He put on his full dress uniform. He buckled his sword. It was a gesture of old-world dignity. If he was to meet his maker, he would do so as an officer of the United States Navy. He went back out onto the deck. The bucket brigade had reformed, but the energy was different now. It was manic, desperate. They knew the pumps were gone. They were bailing out the Atlantic Ocean with buckets, and the Atlantic was winning. Ottinger was there too, but he was not bailing. He was watching the lifeboats. The Central America, like almost every ship of its era, was woefully equipped for a total evacuation. There were nearly 600 people on board. The lifeboats could hold perhaps 100, maybe less in these seas. The math was simple, it was brutal. 500 people were going to have to swim, but who gets the boats? In the logic of the sea, it is women and children first. That is the code. But in the logic of Ottinger, in the logic of the Gilded Age, there is another hierarchy. The hierarchy of importance, the hierarchy of net worth. Ottinger watched the boats being cleared of debris. He watched the crew checking the davits. He stood near the rail, his hand touching the pocket of his coat. He was making his own calculation. The ship was dead. The gold in the hold was lost, or at least the bulk of it was. The crates were too heavy to move. They would go down with the ship. But a man can carry things. A man can fill his pockets. A man can strap a belt around his waist. Ottinger wasn't thinking about saving the women. He wasn't thinking about the coal heavers dying in the dark below. He was thinking about salvage. He was thinking about how much gold a human body could support in the water without sinking. He was about to perform the most dangerous experiment of his life. The sun began to set on the second day of the storm. The light faded into a bruised purple, then black. The ship was now just a dark shape in a darker world. Flares were brought up from the locker. Rockets. Herndon ordered one to be fired. The rocket hissed, streaking up into the storm. It exploded in a burst of red light, illuminating the rain for a split second. A red flash photograph of a nightmare. For that 1 second, you could see them. 400 men staring up at the sky, their faces pale, their eyes wide, their clothes soaked. They looked like ghosts already. The light faded. The darkness returned. And in that darkness, the ship groaned. A deep, structural groan. The sound of wood giving up. The Central America was breaking her back. Down in the hold, the crates of gold shifted one last time. They slid against the bulkhead, a pile of useless metal. They had bought nothing. They had saved no one. They were just rocks, wrapped in the illusion of value. But Ottinger was still holding on. He was preparing. He was not going to let go. The crisis had moved from the mechanical to the moral. The machine had failed. Now it was just men, water, and the terrible choices they would make in the final hours. The stillness before the screams was the heaviest thing of all. As the night deepened, the reality of the numbers settled on the deck like a shroud. There were too many souls. There were too few planks of wood, and the ocean, indifferent and vast, waited for them all. It did not care about the bank failures in New York. It did not care about the gold. It only cared about buoyancy. And Ottinger was about to test the limits of what a man can carry. The stage was set for the final act. The actors were in place. The audience, the sharks, the cold, the dark, was waiting, and the ship began its final slow descent. We are now in the realm of the impossible choices. where civilization is stripped away layer by layer until only the core remains, and the core is usually fear. But sometimes, rarely, it is something else. Sometimes it is duty, and sometimes, tragically, it is greed. The next few hours would reveal which of these forces was stronger. The flares burned out, the wind howled, and the Central America drifted, a dying leviathan, carrying the dreams of a nation down into the deep. The end was not an event, it was a process. And it was beginning now. There is a specific quality to the silence that follows the death of a machine. For days, the passengers and crew of the SS Central America had lived inside a drum. The pounding of the pistons, the vibration of the deck, the roar of the furnaces. This was the heartbeat that told them they were alive. It was a violent, mechanical assurance that man was still imposing his will upon nature. When the engine stopped, that assurance evaporated. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was not quiet. It was filled with the screaming of the wind and the crashing of the sea, but mechanically it was dead. The ship ceased to be a creature of steam and iron. It became a raft, a very large, very heavy, sinking raft. It is now the evening of Saturday, September 12th. The storm has raged for days. The ship is sitting low, wallowing in the trough of the sea, water washing freely over her decks. The sun has set, or at least the grey light has faded into a black so absolute it feels solid. In this darkness, the arithmetic of survival becomes the only math that matters. Captain Herndon stands on the paddle box, shouting through a trumpet. He is trying to organize the chaos. A small brig, a sailing ship called the Marine, has been spotted in the distance. It is damaged, its masts stripped, bobbing like a cork in the hurricane. But it is buoyant. There is a chance. A slim, terrifying chance to transfer the most vulnerable. This is where the Victorian code of chivalry meets the brutal physics of a hurricane. Women and children first is a noble sentiment in a parlor. On a sinking ship in a gale, it is a nightmare of logistics. The lifeboats are lowered. It is a violent operation. The waves are 20 feet high. The boats are smashed against the side of the hull. Oars are broken. Men are crushed. But they manage to launch them. The women are called forward. They have to be lowered by ropes swinging out over the black churning abyss, timing the drop to catch the lifeboat as it rises on a swell. If they mistime it, they fall into the ocean or are crushed between the boat and the ship. It is a scene of profound trauma. Wives are torn from the arms of their husbands. Children are passed hand to hand like parcels. There are screams, prayers, promises of reunion that everyone knows are lies. Ansel Easton, the wealthy passenger, kisses his young wife Addie goodbye. He places her in the harness. He watches her disappear over the rail. He does not know if he will ever see her again. He steps back, lighting a cigar, composing his face into a mask of calm. He is 28 years old. He has everything to live for, and he is watching his life sail away in a small wooden boat. The boats make the perilous journey to the Marine. They offload the women and children. The Marine is drifting away, unable to hold its position. The rowers fight their way back to the Central America to take more, but the distance is growing. The storm is intensifying. The window is closing. Only a few boats make it back, and then they are gone. The Marine disappears into the darkness. The connection is broken. Now only the men remain, 425 men, and the ship is going down. This is the moment where the social contract usually dissolves. In stories of shipwrecks, we expect panic. We expect a riot. We expect men to turn into wolves, fighting over debris, trampling the weak. But on the Central America, something else happens. A strange, eerie calm settles over the doomed. Perhaps it is the exhaustion. They have been bailing water for 30 hours. They are physically spent. Or perhaps it is the leadership of Captain Herndon who remains on the bridge, visible and stoic, a totem of order in a chaotic world. The men begin to prepare for the water. They know the ship cannot last the night. They can feel it under their feet. The deck is angled steeply. The bow is beginning to settle. The ocean is washing around their ankles on the high side of the deck. They begin to strip. They take off their heavy wool coats, their boots, their vests. They understand that in the water, cloth is an anchor. To survive, one must be light. But not everyone is stripping. Ottinger is not stripping. Down in the staterooms and in the shadows of the deck, a different ritual is taking place. It is the ritual of the gold. It is a madness that is difficult to comprehend from the safety of dry land. Why would a man facing almost certain death by drowning strap metal to his body? Why would he voluntarily increase his density? To understand, you have to look at the psychology of the Gilded Age. For men like Ottinger, and for the miners who had spent years sifting mud in the Sierra Nevada, the gold was not just currency. It was their identity. It was the physical manifestation of their suffering, their labor, and their luck. To let it go was to admit that their struggle had been for nothing. To arrive in New York alive but poor was, to some of them, a fate worse than death. So, they made their choice. Witnesses who survived would later tell stories of men opening their satchels on the deck. They poured gold dust into money belts. They filled snake-like tubes of chamois leather with coins and wrapped them around their waists. They stuffed nuggets into their pockets. Ottinger, the man who had watched over the shipment, who had treated the cargo as a holy relic, now made his final transaction. He secured his portion. He strapped the weight to his person. He was betting that he was strong enough to swim with the burden. He was betting that he could cheat the physics of buoyancy. He was not alone. One passenger, a man named Mr. Slyden, was seen offering $20,000 in gold to anyone who could save him. No one took the offer. What good is $20,000 when you are treading water in the Atlantic? The exchange rate had fallen to zero. Another man, a miner, unbuckled his belt of gold and hurled it onto the deck in a rage, shouting, "You have been the ruin of me!" He kicked the leather bag into the scuppers, choosing life over the metal. But Ottinger kept his. He cinched it tight. He felt the cold, hard pressure of it against his ribs. It was a comfort. It was a curse. The time is 8 o'clock. The ship gives a lurch. It is not a roll. It is a shudder, a structural failure deep in the keel. The bow dips sharply. Captain Herndon, still on the paddle box, lifts his hat. It is a gesture of finality. He drops it to the deck. He does not put on a life vest. He does not look for a spar. He stands with the ship. The Central America begins its final plunge. It does not happen like in the movies with a long, slow slide. It is violent and fast. The ocean, which has been patient for days, suddenly rushes in. The air inside the ship is forced out, creating a sound that survivors would describe as a monstrous sigh. An exhalation of the dying Leviathan. Then, the suction. The ship drives under the surface, pulling the ocean down with it. A vortex forms. The men standing on the deck are not just washed away, they are sucked down. They are pulled into the darkness, spinning in a washing machine of debris, ropes, and timber. And then, silence. But only for a second, because as the ship disappears, 400 men are left on the surface. The sound that follows is one of the most haunting in maritime history. It is described by the few who lived as a choir of voices. It was not a scream of panic, but a collective, mournful wail. 400 men thrashing in the freezing water, calling out to God, to their mothers, to their wives. The bird is gone," someone shouts, referring to the captain's nickname. The ocean is now a debris field. Planks, doors, crates, and furniture bob in the waves. The men fight for these scraps of wood. This is where the calculation of weight delivers its verdict. The men who had strapped gold to their bodies effectively tied anvils to their waists. When the ship went down, the suction pulled everyone deep. Those who were light, who had stripped to their underwear, managed to kick their way back to the surface, their lungs bursting. But the men with the gold? Many of them never came up. They were dragged down by their own ambition. They fought against the water, kicking and clawing. But the gold was relentless. It pulled them into the crushing dark. They drowned with their fortunes intact, hugging their wealth all the way to the bottom, 2 miles down. But Ottinger surfaces. He breaks the water, gasping, coughing up brine. He is alive. He is holding onto a piece of wreckage, a hatch cover, perhaps, or a fragment of the deckhouse. And he is still carrying the weight. How he manages this is a mystery of adrenaline and physics. Perhaps the piece of wood he found was large enough to support the extra pounds. Perhaps he was simply a man of immense physical strength. Or perhaps the ocean, in its cruelty, decided to let him live to bear the burden. He is floating in a graveyard. The screaming around him begins to fade. Not because rescue has arrived, but because the cold is doing its work. Hypothermia is a quiet killer. It starts with shivering, violent and uncontrollable. Then, the shivering stops. The muscles stiffen. The mind becomes cloudy. A warm, fuzzy feeling washes over the victim. They stop fighting. They slip away. One by one, the voices in the dark are silenced. The choir loses its singers. Ottinger clings to his raft. He is surrounded by the dead and the dying. He sees men give up. He sees men hallucinate, thinking they see land, or a ship, or a warm fire, and swim away from their debris into the open water, only to sink. He holds on. He holds on to the wood. He holds on to the gold. The storm begins to break. The wind dies down. The clouds part. The stars come out. It is a cruel beauty. The Milky Way stretches across the sky, indifferent to the tragedy below. The phosphorescence in the water glitters, mirroring the stars. For a moment, it looks as if the men are floating in space. Ottinger drifts. Time loses its meaning. Is it midnight? Is it dawn? He drifts away from the main group. He is alone in the vastness. The gold at his waist is heavy. It rubs his skin raw. It drags his lower body down, forcing him to expend more energy to keep his head up. It is a parasite, feeding on his exhaustion, but he does not unbuckle it. The night stretches into an eternity. When the sun finally rises on Sunday morning, the Atlantic is calm. It is a flat, rolling blue desert. The violence of the hurricane has vanished, leaving no trace of the SS Central America. No oil slick, no massive debris field, just scattered bits of wood and a few lonely heads bobbing in the swells. Of the 425 men who went into the water, only a fraction remain. Ottinger is one of them. He is barely conscious. His skin is grey, his eyes are salt-crusted shut, but he is there. And then, a shape on the horizon. A sail. It is the bark, Ellen, a Norwegian ship. She has been battered by the storm as well, but she is afloat. Her captain, staring through a spyglass, sees the debris. He sees the men. He alters course. The rescue is slow. The Ellen has no boats left. They were smashed in the storm. She has to maneuver alongside the swimmers and throw ropes. It is a pitiful sight. Men, half dead, trying to grab a wet rope with frozen fingers. Some are too weak. They stare at the ship at salvation and simply drift past, unable to lift their arms. Ottinger catches a rope. He wraps it around his wrist. He is hauled up the side of the hull. It is a dead weight lift. The sailors on the deck grunt with the effort. They are pulling up a man, yes, but they are also pulling up the metal he carries. He flops onto the deck of the Ellen. He lies there, shivering, a puddle of water forming around him. He is alive. He has survived the sinking of the Titanic of his time. He has survived the hurricane, and he has survived his own greed. He checks his waist. The belt is still there. But he is one of the few. As the Ellen circles the area, the magnitude of the loss becomes clear. They pick up 49 men. The brig Marine had saved the women and children, and a few men, totaling perhaps 50 more. Another ship, the Saxonia, would pick up a few more isolated drifters days later. But the math is inescapable. 425 men are gone. And the gold? The $20 million that was supposed to save the American economy? It is gone. It sits on the bottom of the Atlantic, 8,000 feet down. The pressure there is immense. The darkness is absolute. The wooden crates have settled into the silt. The ship has broken apart, her ribs splayed open like a skeleton. The floating bank is closed. The news travels slowly. It takes days for the rescue ships to reach port, but when they do, the shockwave hits the shore faster than the hurricane ever did. The telegraph wires begin to hum. The Central America is lost. In New York, the rumors start as whispers, then turn into shouts. Crowds gather outside the steamship offices. They are not just families of the lost. They are businessmen. They are bankers. They are creditors. They ask two questions. Did the passengers survive? And did the gold survive? When the answer comes, no, the panic is instantaneous. The panic of 1857 was already simmering. But the loss of the Central America was the gasoline on the fire. Banks that were counting on that shipment to cover their deposits slammed their doors shut. Credit freezes. Businesses across the eastern seaboard declare bankruptcy. Factories close. Men are thrown out of work. The sinking of one ship carrying one specific cargo triggers a depression that will last for years. Ottinger returns to this world. He walks off the rescue ship and back into a society that is crumbling, partly because of the loss of the very thing he tried to protect. He is a survivor, yes, but he is a ghost. He walks the streets of New York, and people look at him with a mixture of awe and suspicion. He is a man who came back from the dead, but the stories begin to circulate. The whispers in the clubs, the quiet conversations in the parlors. Did you hear? Some of them carried gold. Did you hear? Some of them refused to let go. Ottinger lives, but he carries a new weight now. It is not the gold in his belt. It is the silence of the 425 men who did not come back. It is the memory of the choir of voices in the dark. He is a man who made a bet with the ocean. He won his life. But the ocean kept the ledger, and the ocean is patient. It knows that gold does not rust. It knows that the metal is still there, waiting in the dark. It knows that men will come for it again, because the story of the Central America did not end in 1857. The sinking was just the beginning of the obsession. The gold was not lost, it was merely misplaced. And for 130 years the ship slept. The bones of the men dissolved into the sea, the wood rotted, the iron rusted. But the gold remained, shining in the blackness, calling out to a new generation of dreamers. The machine had failed, the men had died. But the ambition? The ambition survived, and soon new machines would be built. Machines designed not to float on the surface, but to go down. Down into the crushing pressure, down to the grave of the Central America. The hunters were coming. When the news hit New York, it didn't arrive with the crash of a wave, but with the clatter of a telegraph key. The Central America is lost. In the fall of 1857, information traveled faster than gold, and that speed was a weapon. The financial district was already a powder keg. The railroads had overextended. The land speculators had gambled on acreage that didn't exist. The trust was gone. And the only thing holding the entire trembling edifice together was the promise of the bullion steaming north from Panama. When that promise dissolved into the Atlantic, the reaction was not grief. It was liquidation. Wall Street became a riot. It was a scene of desperation that would not be matched until 1929. Men in silk hats climbed over the counters of banks, demanding their deposits in hard currency. They held up fistfuls of worthless paper notes, screaming for gold that was currently settling into the silt a mile and a half underwater. The doors slammed shut. The specie circular had failed. The banks suspended payments. The panic of 1857 had begun. It is difficult to overstate the connection. A single shipwreck had decapitated the American economy. Factories in New England went silent. Construction on the frontier halted. Families who had never seen the ocean, who didn't know a paddle wheel from a propeller, starved that winter because of a storm off the Carolina coast. The Central America had carried the payroll of a nation, and the nation went unpaid. In the middle of this wreckage walked the survivors. They were local celebrities of the macabre. They were interviewed by the newspapers, their stories serialized for a penny a word. But as the initial shock faded, a different sentiment began to take root in the public imagination, a quiet, uncomfortable questioning. Why did you survive? Society loves a tragedy, but it demands a hero. Captain Herndon was the hero. He had gone down with the ship, standing on the paddle box, fully uniformed, a symbol of duty. He was martyred. Monuments were built in his honor. A town in Virginia was named after him. He was safe from criticism because he was dead. But Ottinger was alive. And not only was he alive, but he was solvent. The story of the gold belt, the weight he had carried, the gamble he had won, became a whisper that followed him. In the parlors of New York, where widows wore black crepe and wept for husbands who had no graves, the sight of a man who had successfully wrestled a fortune from the sea was complex. Was it bravery? Was it strength? Or was it a cold, calculating selfishness? Ottinger drifted into history, a man defined by the one night where he refused to let go. But while the survivors aged and died, while the Civil War tore the country apart and reconstructed it, while the horse carriage gave way to the automobile and the automobile to the airplane, the Central America remained exactly where she was. We must now shift our gaze. We must leave the noisy streets of Manhattan and descend. We go down through the water column, past the sunlit zone where the plankton bloom, past the twilight zone where the light fails, down into the bathypelagic, the midnight zone, 8,000 feet down. The pressure here is crushing, nearly 4,000 pounds per square inch. It is enough to compress a styrofoam cup to the size of a thimble. It is a world of perpetual darkness, silence, and cold. The water temperature hovers just above freezing. Here lies the ship. She did not land gently. She hit the bottom with the force of a train collision. The wooden superstructure, weakened by rot and the violence of the storm, shattered. The ironworks, the massive steam engines, the boilers, the paddle wheels plummeted through the decks. The Central America was no longer a ship. She was a debris field, a scar on the ocean floor. For a century she was visited only by the residents of the deep. Glass sponges, delicate and white as lace, grew on the rotting timbers. Galathide crabs crawled over the coal slag. Deep-sea currents, slow and relentless, dusted the wreckage with a fine layer of marine snow, the organic detritus falling from the world above. The gold was there too. Gold is a noble metal. It does not corrode, it does not rust, it does not react with oxygen or seawater. While the iron turned to orange rusticles and the wood was eaten by worms, the gold remained pristine. The coins, minted in San Francisco in 1856, still shone with the same luster as the day they were struck. The bars, stamped with the names of assayers like Kellogg and Humbert, sat in the mud, waiting. It was a bank vault with no door, guarded only by depth and physics. For 130 years, the ocean kept its ledger. The location of the wreck was lost. The navigation of 1857 was imprecise. Captain Herndon's last reported position was a guess made in a hurricane. The ship was somewhere off the Carolinas. That is a haystack the size of a European country. But the legend did not die, it merely slept. And then the world changed. The 20th century brought war, and war brought technology. Sonar, magnetometers, deep-sea submersibles. We learned to map the bottom of the world to hide our submarines and hunt the submarines of others. The ocean became transparent. In the 1980s, a new kind of explorer emerged. He was not a sea captain with a beard and a pipe. He was not a rugged adventurer with a treasure map. He was a mathematician, an engineer. His name was Tommy Thompson. To understand the recovery of the Central America, you have to understand that it was not an adventure. It was a geometry problem. Thompson did not trust myths. He trusted data. He spent years in the Library of Congress, reading the diaries of the survivors, the logbooks of the rescue ships, the meteorological reports of the hurricane. He built a probability grid. He used Bayesian search theory, a complex statistical method used to find lost nuclear bombs. He didn't look for the X that marked the spot. He looked for the probability cloud. He gathered investors. He didn't sell them a dream of romance, he sold them a business plan. He told them that the gold was a commodity, and the ocean was just a thick layer of inventory management that needed to be pierced. He built a robot. Its name was Nemo. It was a machine that looked like a garage project, a boxy, ugly contraption of thrusters, cameras, and robotic claws. But it was a masterpiece of engineering. It was an avatar. It allowed a man to sit in a control room on a surface ship, drinking coffee, while his mechanical hands worked in the crushing dark a mile and a half below. The search began in the summer of 1988. It was boring. Real treasure hunting is 99% boredom. It is staring at a monitor for weeks on end, watching a grainy yellow and black image of the seafloor scroll by. It is mud, rock, more mud, a beer can from the 1970s, more mud. The crew of the Arctic Discoverer, Thompson's ship, lived in a state of suspended animation. They were ghost hunters, trawling the abyss. And then, the anomaly. On the side-scan sonar, it didn't look like a ship. It looked like a smudge, a variation in the texture of the bottom, a shadow where there should have been flat sand. They lowered Nemo. The descent takes hours. The camera lights are switched on. The darkness is pushed back. The first things they saw were not gold, they were coal, chunks of anthracite scattered across the sediment, the fuel that had failed the firemen in 1857, then the timber, rotting black ribs sticking out of the mud, then the iron, the massive paddle wheel shaft, broken and lonely. The control room was silent. They knew they had found a shipwreck. But was it the shipwreck? The Atlantic is a graveyard. There are thousands of vessels down there. Nemo thrusted forward, kicking up clouds of silt. The cameras panned across the debris field, and then the light caught it. It is an image that has been burned into the retina of maritime history. It wasn't a single coin. It wasn't a scattered few nuggets. It was a garden. The wooden crates had rotted away decades ago, dissolving into nothing, but the contents had remained stacked in their original formation. There were towers of gold bars, rows of them, sitting on the ocean floor like bricks in a wall, and carpeting the mud around them were the coins, thousands of them, tens of thousands, double eagles. They lay in heaps, spilling over the sediment, creating a literal road of gold. In the light of the submersible, they didn't look old. They looked like they had been dropped yesterday. They sparked and glittered, mocking the gloom. In the control room, the silence broke. Men cheered, some wept. The math had worked, the ghost had been found. But as the robotic arm reached out, buzzing with the whine of hydraulics, to gently pinch a single gold coin and lift it from its resting place, a shift occurred. The moment the gold left the bottom, the story changed. It was no longer a story of loss. It was no longer a story of the 425 men who drowned. It was no longer a story of the widow's tears or the panic of 1857. It became a story of possession. The gold was coming back to the surface, and just like in the days of Ottinger, the return of the weight would bring a new kind of madness. The Central America had been a tomb. Now it was a bank vault that had been cracked open. And the first thing that rises from a cracked tomb is not the treasure, it is the ghosts. As the basket of gold was winched up through the water column, ascending from the crushing dark toward the sunlight, the lawyers were already sharpening their knives. The insurance companies, the ones who had paid out the claims in 1857, suddenly remembered their losses. The descendants of the survivors remembered their grandfathers' stories. The gold was about to break the surface, and the world was about to remember why the Central America was cursed. The ocean had kept the ledger for 100 years. Now it was time for the courts to open theirs. The salvage had begun, but the tragedy was far from over.